Hi there, I'm Scott Hall with Moroso Performance, and thanks for joining us for this episode of Moroso TV. Today what we're going to show you is the proper way to check your oil pan to oil pan pickup clearance, and by two methods that Moroso highly recommends and that have been used for decades by the nation's top engine builders. Simply what we're doing is to ensure the performance of the pickup clearance to the oil pan that we're always going to have sufficient volume that this pump can pull from the sump of your oil pan and always give you the proper oil pressure. There's a lot of factors involved, whether it's a street motor, a race motor, RPM, and if you're making crankcase vacuum or not. Plus, what's important of the two ways we're going to show you is by actually having the components on the motor itself, and by bolting this pan down in one of the methods, we're actually going to be able to in real life simulate exactly what this pickup clearance is going to be. So spend some time with us, and by the time we're done, you will be able to check this and know for sure that you do have the proper clearance to get the best performance out of your Moroso oiling system. Okay, the first method we're going to show you on checking our oil pan to pickup clearance is by using clay on the pickup and by actually assembling the entire pan onto the motor. Now what you can see here is we have our small block Chevy setup, we have our one-piece Moroso oil pan gasket, and we've got a 22-139 pump pickup combination that's already been welded together at the factory. Now when we build these, we've already done a lot of the math and engineering on it, and we know that when it goes on a standard height main cap, with our gasket and our pan, that we should have the proper clearance, but it's still important to check it yourself. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a 20191 Moroso oil pan that we're going to use for this demonstration. What we're going to do is we're going to show you here in a moment exactly how to get the clay on this and assemble everything, and we'll figure out our pump pickup clearance. Okay, let's begin our first method of checking our oil pump pickup clearance by simply cleaning off the pickup on the oil pump and making sure that it's oil free. Take a piece of racer's tape and place it right across the pickup. Now what's important here to remember is that the pump sits on these blocks at a slight angle. So when Moroso builds these pump pickup combos, we try to ensure that the pickup is parallel to the oil pan sump and the block. But there could be a little bit of variation left to right on it, which is commonly seen especially when you're welding them on yourself and trying to follow the bracketry or whatever. So that's why we're going to check this on 2 points and on the corners. Never check it in the middle of the pickup box because obviously the screen is there. When we go to compress the clay down against it, it may push the screen in. We're now going to take some simple Play-Doh and we're going to roll the two balls. I want them to be about 3/4 of an inch thick because obviously the maximum depth that we'd ever be looking for in clearance is a little under 1/2 inch. So we're going to roll these two in the balls and place them on the two opposite corners of it. Now we're going to place the oil pan on it and we're going to bolt down the 4 corners and we're going to see what we get for clearance. Okay, the clay is ready. We're going to grab the oil pan now. We've taken the screen out of it so it'll be a lot easier to put on and not knock the clay off when we're doing this. So we're going to put the oil pan on. You can already feel the clay compressing on it. So what we're going to do for this is we're just going to use our 4 corner oil pan bolts. And by cinching this down onto the gasket, it'll basically give us a good representation of what we're looking for. The other thing this will do is just kind of give you a first eye view on how everything's going together as far as the relationship between the gasket and the oil pan. And if you got your rotating assembly already in and complete, once you get this pan on, now's a great time to probably turn that rotating assembly over to make sure everything inside is not touching or interfering, and that it fits up around the main caps. So we've got our 4 cornered bolts down, snug. What we're going to do is we're going to come over here to the sump, and I'm going to push this down. The reason I'm pushing this down is if we had a vacuum pump on this application, vacuum pumps will take this large area of the rear sump and draw it down a little bit and close up that clearance a little bit more than you'd want. So we got this thing snugged, gaskets compressed, everything looks great. Push this down, now we're going to take it apart and we're going to see what we got for that clearance on our clay. Alright, let's get this last bolt off the oil pan here. And let's take this thing off and let's see what we have. Try to work it up slowly so we don't knock the clay out of the position. And as you can see, they both stuck onto our pickup assembly over here. So you can kind of get an idea. It's flattened it out, spread it out, and it's on the two corners that we wanted to see. So at this point, there's two things you can do. You can take this thing and pull it off of here, and hopefully it'll come off clean. Now you can actually see that thickness and measure it. The other way to do it, if you want to be real precise, is to actually take a razor blade, cut it in half while you have it here, and then go down with a pair of vernier calipers and actually check to see what that dimension is to be real accurate with it. Okay, our first method, check it with a pair of vernier calipers, and we're basically looking at about 430 thousandths clearance on this. And then the other way we could do this is by, again, taking the razor blade if we don't want to remove it. If you cut it in half, remove the piece, you can now look at the cross section of the clay and again measure it the same way with a pair of verniers, and we're at about 425 on that. So those are the two ways of measuring it, but you can visually see in real life exactly how much clearance that you have both on the left and the right side of the pickup. All right, let's talk technical about what we've now just seen. We have about 425 to 430 thousandths clearance, but that is with a one-piece gasket. When Moroso came out with our 1/4 to 3/8 dimensions back in the day, that was considering 4-piece paper rail gaskets. These one-piece gaskets are about 50 to 60 thousandths thicker, so therefore are going to bring up that clearancing a little bit more. We really haven't seen any issues on street motors and race motors with this thicker gasket being an issue on anything. And again, I'm going to remind you, when you run a vacuum pump on a drag race motor, it will try to draw that sump down. So if we want to take the gasket discussion out of our measuring here, we'll just simply remove the gasket, take our oil pan, put it back on here. Now we can actually press it down against the block and know that we're touching. Now let's remove it. I'm going to get my vernier calipers again, and we're going to measure this piece right here. And this is at about 275 thousandths, which tells us that one-piece gasket is about 150 thousandths thick. So we could remove 50 to 60 thousandths of that clearance by putting a 4-piece gasket on if we choose. So as you can see, there's ways of adjusting exactly what we have here. So keep that in mind when you do make your clearance decision based on using the clay. Okay, let's show you the second way to check your oil pump pickup clearance by using a simple straight edge and a tape measure. You can use vernier calipers also. Now, all we're going to simply do is take a steel straight edge and go across the pickup. And we have a basic tape measure that's in 1/16 of an inch increments, like any tape measure you probably have at your house. Now, where the issue comes in with how accurate this is because if there is a slight angle on this pickup, where we're going to be measuring based on the block rail, well, it's multiplied by the distance we're going out by how much more height it has. So you got to kind of take a dimension on the left side, a dimension on the right side, and average the two out to really give you your center dimension. So we're going to measure the one side here. We are basically at 8 1/8. We come to the other side here, we're at 7 7/8. So if we split it down the middle, we're basically at 8 inches here in the center. And that's the dimension that we're going to write down that'll work for our pickup clearance to our block rail for our first dimension we're going to start out with. Okay, we're going to take our second dimension that we're looking for in this equation, and that's the depth of the sump of the oil pan. We're going to take our same steel straight edge we used earlier, lay it across the rear of the sump where the pump and pickup combo will rest on the main cap and sit inside the sump. We're going to take our tape measure, and we're going to go right to the bottom of the sump and measure it to the bottom of our straight edge, and we are pretty much right at 8 1/4 inches deep, just as advertised when you do buy this oil pan from Moroso. So at this point now we know the depth of the sump, we know how the pickup bottom sits in relationship to the pan rail. So now the only thing that we got to go measure now is our gasket thickness. And this is where there's a little bit of variation, and we're going to show you that in the next scene. Obviously, if we use calipers it'd be a little bit tighter measurements and our math would be probably out a couple more decimal points to be able to give us a real exact dimension. But these are real basic and going to give you an idea of where you are. Okay, for the third part of our dimension taking, we're going to look at a 4-piece gasket, paper rail gasket, versus the 1-piece silicone gasket. Now we know in the last 5 or 10 years the silicone 1-piece gaskets have become more popular and with more applications available. So if we take a look at a regular paper gasket with these calipers, I can hold that gasket and get about 100 thousandths thick. Obviously it'll compress a little bit more once we do tighten it down. Now with the 1-piece silicone rubber gasket, holding it, I can squeeze it down to about 150 thousandths, maybe a little bit more once we tighten it down. That's why doing the clay gives you a more accurate dimension, because you're actually compressing it into its normal mode the way it'll be on the engine. So you can see a 50 thousandths variance that exists here, and that'll make a big difference on the number that you are ultimately looking for. So keep that in mind when you're putting all this together and the final number that you do end up getting, because a lot of the variation could be from the gasket itself. But as we will discuss, that a little bit extra clearance at the pump and pickup normally isn't too big of an issue. Next, we're going to write down these numbers and take a look at it and see how all this will work out doing it by taking individual dimensions versus what we saw with the clay. Now we have all of our numbers. Let's put it down on paper and see what all this means. We're going to go and take a look at the oil pan sump depth that we measured. That was 8 1/4 inches. The pickup bottom to the block rail was 8 inches. That overall clearance, that gives us basically 1/4 of an inch of clearance. Now when we looked at the 4-piece rail gasket, that was 100 thousandths thick. The 1-piece rail gasket was 150. So if we take these two options that we have, a 4-piece rail gasket, overall pump pickup clearance to the pan would end up being 350 thousandths. Where we look at the 1-piece thicker gasket, our pickup to pan clearance would end up being 400 thousandths. Now, if we take a look at what we did with the clay earlier on versus the measured way we just did it, you can see that the 1-piece gasket measured comes out to 400 thousandths clearance. That when we do it with the clay, we have 425 thousandths clearance. So you can see the different ways of measuring will give you a slightly different number just based on tolerancing and the ability to measure the stuff certain ways. But you can see the two different ways to do this and how the numbers come out close. But it's the best way to really give you an idea of what's going on once you bolt down your pan and how that pickup is resting up close to it. We thank you for taking your time to watch this. Hopefully we've helped you out. And if you have any questions, please call the Moroso Tech Department or go to moroso.com for any other information you may need. Thanks a lot.